He did not raise his voice, not even then, standing in the doorway of the room that was now hers with his cravat already loosened and the words already spoken. "I will not touch you," Julian Rathmore, 7th Duke of Rathmore, had said not an hour before the whole glittering weight of the wedding breakfast, and again here, quieter, meant only for her. "That much I can still afford to promise you." Verity Ashworth, who was Verity Rathmore now and had not yet learned to answer to it, sat very straight on the edge of the bed in her wedding shift, with her hands folded in her lap the way her father had taught her to fold them over a ledger that would not balance, and did not let her face report what the sentence cost her. She would remember this room longest, afterward, the candle guttering sideways in a draught that should not have existed, the smell of beeswax and, beneath it, faintly orange flower pomade that did not belong to either of them. Had she known that night what the smell meant, she would have said nothing. She had learned, at some expense, to say nothing rather than the wrong thing. The clock in the hall had not yet finished striking 11 when the sound came from beneath the window, not a creak, which the house made constantly and meant nothing, but a scrape, deliberate, the drag of a boot heel against stone that a boot heel had no business making at that hour in a duchess's chamber. Verity was on her feet before she had decided to stand, one hand already at the bolster, where, from long habit of poverty, she kept nothing worth stealing, and so felt, for one absurd instant, safe. The window gave onto the old dressing closet that had not been used since the last duchess died, and it was from there that the shape came, low and fast, gloved hands already at the small writing desk her father's trunk had been set beside that afternoon. Pulling at the lock, she did not scream. She had never, in 26 years of being poor and watched and easily dismissed, found that screaming got her anything she wanted. She said, evenly, "That is not yours," and the shape turned, and she saw enough of a jaw and a coat sleeve to know it was a man and a stranger, and then the door came open behind her so hard it cracked against the wall, and it was Julian, still in his shirt sleeves, and whatever vow he had made not 1 hour earlier he broke in the next 3 seconds without seeming to notice he was breaking it, crossing the room and putting himself and his arm both between Verity and the window before either of them had chosen it. The intruder went out the way he had come, fast and graceless, and Julian did not chase him. He stood instead, with his hand still closed hard around Verity's upper arm, closer to her than a man keeps to a wife he has sworn not to touch, and looked at her face as though checking it for damage the way a groom checks a horse's legs after a fall, thoroughly, and without apology for the thoroughness. "Are you hurt?" he said. It was not a question so much as an inventory. "No," Verity said, and heard her own voice come out steadier than her knees currently felt, and did not step back from his hand, because some old animal instinct told her that the hand, just now, was the safest thing in the room. 40 days. That was the number that would come to matter, though neither of them said it that night. 40 days until Michaelmas, when the estate's accounts closed for the year and the old ledgers, by a custom older than the dukedom itself, were bound, sealed, and burned to make room in the muniment room for the new. 40 days until whatever her father had known, if he had known anything, if the shape at the window had wanted anything of hers worth the risk of a hanging offense, would be past all recovering, one way or the other. She did not know that number yet. She only knew that her new husband's hand had not left her arm, that his vow lay broken on the floor between them not an hour after he had spoken it, and that neither of them was going to be the one to mention it. "Whoever that was," Julian said, releasing her at last, stepping back with the particular care of a man closing a door he does not trust himself to leave open, was after something. "I will have the house searched." You will have the house searched, Verity said, and find nothing, because whoever sent him already has what he came for, or was too well warned to leave it lying about. Julian looked at her for a long moment in the candlelight, an assessing look she was already coming to recognize, the look of a man doing sums in his head and disliking the total. You say, sent him, he said. Not came himself, a duke's cousin who keeps the household accounts, Verity said, does not climb through his own dressing closet window in polished boots. He sends a man who can run faster than he can. It was the first time she had said Edmund Penrose's name in that house, without saying it, and Julian heard the shape of it perfectly well, and did not deny it, and did not confirm it either, which she would later understand was the most honest answer he was capable of giving her that night. The morning after a wedding is meant, by every custom Verity had ever heard sung about in ballads not written for women like her, to be soft, a slow waking, a shared table, some tender foolishness over chocolate. What she got instead, at 7 o'clock precisely, was her husband already dressed, already at his father's old desk in the study 2 doors down, and a summons delivered by a footman too well trained to smirk, though he wanted to. She found Julian with 3 ledgers open before him, and his jaw set in the particular hard line she would learn, eventually, meant not anger, but arithmetic. Sit, he said, and then, apparently hearing himself, please, Verity sat. I am told, Julian said, not looking up from the column he was adding, that you kept your father's books for him from the age of 12, that you can read a hand at a glance and tell you whether it was written in 1 sitting or built up over 3 sittings by a man copying his own forgery slowly enough not to be caught. That you know an altered figure from an honest one the way another woman knows a false stitch in lace. I am told a great many things about myself lately that I did not say, Verity said. Some of them are even true. That earned her nothing, not yet, not even the ghost of the thing that would eventually become his laugh, only a flicker at the corner of his mouth, gone before it could be called an expression. This house owes £11,000 it should not owe, he said. My cousin manages it and tells me the harvests have been poor 3 years running, and the tenants slow to pay. I do not think the harvests have been poor. I think I have been too occupied with my father's dying and my own grief to look closely at a man I was raised to trust, and I would like, before my illness, to know which of those 2 things is a lie. And you married a stranger the same week you decided to go looking, Verity said. It was not quite a question. I married the one woman in England, Julian said, and here, finally, he did look up, whose father built the very set of books my cousin has been keeping since, and whose father died disgraced for reasons I have never once found convincing, and who has every reason on this earth to want the truth of those accounts as badly as I do, and every skill to find it. Verity sat very still, the way she had learned to sit still under worse scrutiny than this. You did not marry me to save my name, she said slowly, working it through as she spoke, the way she worked through a stubborn column. You married me to use it. I married you, Julian said, and there was something in his voice now that was not quite arithmetic, because it was the only arrangement my cousin could not object to without exposing his own hand too early, and because it put you inside these walls, where I could see to your safety myself rather than leave you to whatever accident might otherwise have found a penniless woman who knew too much. About a set of books someone very much wants forgotten. There is a reason beyond that. I am not able to lay it before you yet. I ask you to accept that it exists. That is a very large thing to ask a woman to accept from a man who has known her 4 days, Verity said. Yes, Julian agreed. It is. He did not soften it, and she found, oddly, that she trusted the sentence more for its refusal to be softened. It was old Mrs. Quill, the housekeeper, who found her an hour later standing at the foot of the great stair with her father's brass-cornered trunk still unopened at her feet, and who took one look at her face and said, without preamble, "You've the look of a woman who's been handed a bargain and not the whole of its terms," and did not wait for an answer before adding, "Sit down before you fall down, madam, and I'll bring tea, and you'll tell me nothing you don't wish to, and I'll believe none of what his lordship's cousin says about your father, because I buried my own husband on less evidence than that man ever produced against a good one." It was, Verity would think later, the first kindness anyone in that house had offered her that did not come attached to a price, and she wept over it, quietly, for exactly as long as it took to drink one cup of tea, and then she squared the trunk's corners with her toe until they lined true with the floorboards, and did not weep again for some while. Edmund Penrose came to call on the 4th day, which everyone in the house understood to mean he had waited exactly as long as courtesy required, and not 1 hour longer. He was, Verity thought, watching him cross the drawing room with his gloves already half off, one of the handsomest men she had ever seen do harm, and she had grown up watching harm done by men who did not trouble to disguise it, so the comparison unsettled her more than she let show. He kissed her hand as though he meant it. "My dear cousin," he said, "for you are that now. Are you not? However oddly arrived at, I confess I did not think Julian had it in him, marrying so far beneath the usual notice, and marrying, of all women, the daughter of—" He paused, exactly long enough. Well, we need not dredge up old unpleasantness on a wedding week. It was generous of him. Some would say saintly. Some would say practical, Verity said. My father's name has value to no one. My competence, apparently, has some. Something moved behind Edmund's eyes, there and gone, quick as a fish under ice. Competence, he said, smoothing one already smooth glove finger by finger. A small fastidious motion she would come to know as well as she knew her own pulse. Yes, I understand you were quite the little accountant in your father's day. A pity all that cleverness did not extend to noticing what was under his own nose. It extended exactly that far, Verity said, meeting his eyes and keeping her voice as mild as his own. That was rather the trouble, I think. The silence that followed was not long, but it told her everything the words had not, and she filed it away the way her father had taught her to file away a suspicious figure, not accused, not confronted, only noted, and watched to see what column it turned up in next. Below stairs, she gathered over the following fortnight, the household had already placed its bets, quite literally, Mrs. Quill reported with grim relish that the second footman was offering 3-to-1 the marriage would not survive to Christmas, and the scullery maid had wagered a month's wages the new Duchess would be with child by Lady Day, an outcome Verity found so wildly improbable given the current terms of her marriage that she laughed aloud for the first time since her father's funeral. A short startled sound that surprised her more than it surprised Mrs. Quill. It was in the 3rd week, going through the household's daybook by candlelight while she waited, unnecessarily, for a husband who kept his own hours and his own rooms, that she found the first thread worth pulling. A column of rents received in the spring quarter, entered in Edmund's own careful hand. Added correctly enough on its face, but the ink of the final figure sat a half shade darker than the ink above it, the nib recut. The pen refilled to alter a 6 into an 8 after the page had dried. It was a small thing. It would have meant nothing to anyone who had not spent a childhood at her father's elbow being taught, patiently, the way another child is taught scales at a pianoforte, to read ink the way a physician reads a pulse. She did not tell Julian that night. She told herself she was waiting for more than one thread before she troubled him with it, and told herself that this, and not fear of what his face would do if she was wrong, was the whole of her reason. It was over the household accounts, oddly, that the two of them first found anything like ease with one another, which Verity supposed said something true about them both that neither would have chosen to say aloud. 3 weeks into the marriage, he came to find her in the estate office at an hour when he was meant to be at the assizes, and instead of asking why she had moved his father's chair, he simply pulled up the other one and said, "Show me what you have found," and did not once, in the 2 hours that followed, treat her the way every other person of consequence in her life had treated her competence, as a curiosity, a parlor trick, a thing to be complimented and set aside. He argued with her. He found the flaw in her second theory before she did, and told her so bluntly, and she found she did not mind it in the least, because he was right, and because he said it the way one accountant says it to another, not the way a duke says it to a wife. "Your father taught you this," he said at last, low, watching her hands move sure and quick over the columns. "He did," Verity said. "He used to say a column that will not balance is not lying to you. It is hiding something. Find what it hides and be gentle with it." Julian was quiet a moment. That is a kind way to think of numbers. He was a kind man, Verity said, and heard her own voice catch, and did not apologize for it, because she had decided somewhere in the last 3 weeks that she was done apologizing for grief in this house. "He would have liked you rather better than you currently deserve, I think, for what your family did to his name." "I know," Julian said, and did not defend himself, which she had not expected, and which cost her something to hear, some careful wall coming down half a brick's width. There is a particular intimacy in two people bent over the same page by the same candle, close enough that a shoulder brushes a shoulder and neither pulls away, and Verity, who had armored herself for 26 years in dry wit and stillness, precisely because she had never once been able to afford to want anything she could not also account for, found herself wanting, quite badly, for this not to be an arrangement. She told him one card, that night, of the several she was holding. "I have found discrepancies," she said, in the spring rents, small, deliberate. "I believe someone has been altering figures after the ink dried." She did not tell him about her father's private book, the small brass cornered ledger sewn now into the lining of her mother's old paisley shawl at the bottom of her trunk, in a cipher her father had taught her before he taught her plain sums. The book he had pressed into her hands the week before he died, and told her, with a steadiness that had frightened her more than tears would have, to keep safe and show no one until she was certain of the room she stood in. She was not certain of this room yet. She was becoming less uncertain by the day, but not certain, and so she kept that one card down and told herself it was wisdom and not cowardice, and was perhaps half right. Julian, for his part, laughed that night, not the flicker she had catalogued before, but a real laugh, startled out of him when she observed, dryly, that his cousin signed his own forged figures with more care than most men give their marriage lines, and the sound of it changed his whole face so thoroughly that Mrs. Quill, passing in the corridor with a tray, stopped dead and stared through the half-open door as though she had witnessed a miracle, which, in that house, she rather had. The blow, when it came dressed as concern, which was Edmund Penrose's particular genius, and it came 11 days later at a dinner Verity had not wanted to attend, and could not, as Duchess, refuse. He waited until the covers were cleared and the servants withdrawn to the sideboard, and then he set down his glass with the small, precise click of a man arranging evidence, and said, gently, to the table at large, "I confess I have been troubled, Julian, and I did not wish to trouble you with it on your honeymoon, but I think the time for delicacy has passed." Rents have been going missing from this estate for above a year now. I had thought it tenant hardship. I have since learned that someone with access to the muniment room has been altering the daybook after the fact, a hand, I am told, remarkably practiced at exactly that sort of alteration. He did not look at Verity. He did not need to. Every head at the table turned for him. I should not need to remind anyone present, he went on, softer still. The gentlest voice in the room, and therefore, Verity now understood with total clarity the most dangerous, whose father was disgraced for precisely this offense, nor whose daughter has spent 3 weeks alone in that same muniment room with unrestricted access to the very books in question. The silence that followed had weight. Verity could feel it pressing on the backs of her hands, where they lay flat on the table, perfectly still, while inside her chest something cold and familiar settled into place. The old bracing she had not needed since her father's trial. It was not anger she felt first. Anger would have been easier. What she felt first was the specific, sickening vertigo of watching her own competence, the one thing in this world she had ever been allowed to be proud of, the gift her father had given her in place of a dowry, turned in her hands like a knife she had not known was double-edged. She had gone looking for the thief with the very skill the thief now meant to hang on her. Julian did not look at her either, not at first, and in the half-second before he did, Verity felt something she had not expected to feel again so soon, the old, familiar readiness to be believed guilty by a man whose good opinion she had begun, against every strategy she owned, to want. When he did look at her, his face had gone to stone. Not the warm stillness of the estate office, but a colder thing entirely, and he said, in a voice with all the arithmetic and none of the warmth, "Is this true?" "Some of it," Verity said, because she had promised herself long ago never to lie even when the truth cut her, and none of it in the way your cousin means it. "I have found alterations in the day book. I did not make them. You have been alone with those books for 3 weeks," Julian said. "I have," Verity said, "at your own invitation, examining them for exactly the fraud your cousin is now so helpfully naming, and finding it and being slow to bring it to you, because I wished to be certain before I accused a member of your own family of a crime that killed mine." It should have satisfied him. She watched it not satisfy him, watched the doubt her enemy had planted take root in soil, that grief and old loss had already turned soft, and understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who has been here before, that the very asset she had brought into this marriage, her eye, her patience, her father's gift, had just been handed back to her as a weapon, and that the safety she had begun, foolishly, to feel inside these walls had been a trap all along, dressed very prettily as a home. The quarrel that night was not loud. Julian did not shout. He had never once, in all the weeks she had known him, raised his voice, and she understood now that this was not gentleness but control, the particular quiet of a man who did not trust what his voice would do if he let it move. "I want the books locked," he said, "and I want you out of that room until this is settled." "You want me out of the room," Verity said, "because it is easier to suspect a woman you can lock a door on than a cousin you were raised to love." That landed. She saw it land, saw something flinch behind the stone of his face, and pressed no further, because cruelty had never once in her life gotten her anything she wanted either. Edmund came to her 2 days later, alone, in the small parlor she had claimed for her own, and set upon the table between them, with the delicacy of a man laying down a winning hand, a folded paper. "A settlement," he said. "Generous, I think, given the circumstances. An annulment quietly obtained. The marriage unconsummated, I am told, which makes the business considerably tidier than it might have been. £500 a year, a cottage of your choosing at a comfortable distance, and no further mention by anyone of your father's name in connection with this family's accounts. You would want for nothing. You would be, for the first time in your life I imagine, entirely secure. You are offering to buy my silence with the very sum you stole, Verity said, not touching the paper. I am offering you a dignity your circumstances have never permitted you, Edmund said, and smiled, and it was, she thought, the most honestly wicked sentence she had yet heard him speak, because he believed every word of it. Gratitude, my dear, is simply a debt the poor are too proud to call by its right name. Call it what it is. Take the money. Verity looked at the paper for a long moment and thought of her father, dead 2 years now of a shame that was never his to carry, and thought of the small brass-cornered book sewn into her mother's shawl at the bottom of her trunk, and thought, longest of all, of Julian's face gone to stone across the dinner table, and what it would cost her, precisely, to walk away now with £500 a year and a cottage, and a lifetime of being the woman who had, in the end, confirmed everyone's worst opinion of her by taking the bribe. No, she said. I did not marry your cousin for comfort, and I will not be bought out of a marriage for comfort either. If I leave this house, Mr. Penrose, I will leave it as my father left this world, with my name clean or not at all. Edmund's smile did not move, but something behind it did, a small recalculation she filed away exactly as she had filed the darker ink. That, he said, rising, gathering his gloves with that same fastidious care, is a very expensive kind of pride, Duchess. I hope you can afford it. She could not, in point of fact, afford it at all, not in any coin the world usually accepted, and she sat alone in the parlor a long while after he had gone, turning the refused paper over once in her hands before she fed it, corner first, into the grate, and watched it burn the way her father's name had burned, slowly, and without her permission, 2 years before. The dismissal came 4 days after that, delivered by Julian himself in a voice with the door already half shut behind it. You will keep to your rooms, he said, until the audit is settled. I have asked Mrs. Quill to see to your needs. He did not say I no longer trust you, but Verity had spent a lifetime hearing sentences for what they did not say, and heard that one perfectly well. She did not argue. She had learned, watching her father argue his own innocence to a room already decided against him, that argument spent against a closed door only wastes the breath a person will need later, when the door opens. She kept to her rooms and sewed, badly and without interest, and read the same page of a book 11 times without once absorbing it, and on the 3rd night of her confinement heard, very late, footsteps in the corridor outside that did not belong to Mrs. Quill's careful tread nor to any housemaid's, and lay still in the dark with her heart going hard against her ribs, and thought, with a strange calm that surprised her, that if someone had come at last to finish what the man at the window had started, she would at least meet it standing rather than caught asleep. It was not, in the end, a threat. It was a folded note pushed beneath her door, unsigned, in a hand she recognized after a moment's study as belonging to Silas Dobbins, the estate's under-clerk, a stooped, nervous man she had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with in 3 months, and who had always struck her as a man carrying something too heavy for the size of his hands. The note said only, I know what was done to your father. I helped do it. I cannot say more under this roof. Come to the old dovecote at first light, and come alone if you would have the truth before it burns with the rest. Verity read it 4 times, and then sat with her back against the door until the candle guttered out, turning over in her mind every reason this might be a trap laid by Edmund to draw her out and be rid of her cleanly at last. And every reason it might not be, and arrived, near dawn, at the same conclusion she always arrived at when the choice lay between safety and truth, that she had married into this house specifically because she was tired, bone-tired, of choosing safety and calling it wisdom. She would go, she only wished, sitting there in the dark with her father's cipher book pressed flat beneath her palm, where she had drawn it at last from her mother's shawl, that she knew what Julian would do when he learned she had gone without him, whether the stone in his face these last 4 days was doubt of her, or fear for her, or, worst of all and hardest to forgive. Some tangled, unbearable mixture of both, that she would not have the chance to sort out before whatever waited at the dovecote either freed her or finished her. The dovecote stood at the far edge of the home wood, disused since the old Duke's time, and Verity reached it in the gray, not quite light before sunrise, with her cloak drawn tight and her father's book against her ribs beneath it, and found Silas Dobbins already there, twisting his cap in both hands with such violence she thought he might tear it. "I did not think you'd come," he said. "I did not think you'd write," Verity said, and waited, because she had learned that silence pulled truth out of frightened men better than any question could. It pulled this, that Silas Dobbins had entered the muniment room the day her father died, and, at Edmund Penrose's direction, and under threat of his own family's ruin, a sick wife, 3 children, a debt to Edmund's own private purse that Edmund had engineered, and then called due at precisely the moment he needed a frightened man's silence, had helped alter 11 months of entries to make Thomas Ashworth's honest bookkeeping look like theft, working from Edmund's own notes Edmund had been careless enough, in the arrogance of a man who has never once been questioned, to keep. "He keeps everything," Silas said. Locked in the estate strongbox, if you can credit the cheek of it, thinks no one dares open a duke's own steward's box uninvited. Letters telling me what figures to change. His hand, not mine. I copied nothing I was not told to copy, madam, and I have carried it 2 years like a stone in my chest, and when they said you were to be sent off quiet with your name still ruined, I thought a man can only carry a stone so long before it drowns him. "Will you say this before witnesses?" Verity asked, very steady, though her pulse was not steady at all. "I will hang for it," Silas said, and then, seeing her face, not for saying it, for the doing of it, if it comes to a court, but I'd rather hang honest than live another year the way I've been living. Yes, I'll say it. It was at that moment, with the sky just beginning to gray properly over the wood, that hooves sounded on the path behind them, and Verity turned, bracing for Edmund, for the man from the window, for anyone at all except who it truly was, Julian, alone, unshaven, his coat thrown on over an open collar, reining in so hard his horse half reared. He had not come to stop her. He had come, she understood in the half-second before he spoke, because Mrs. Quill had found her rooms empty and raised the house, and because whatever doubt his cousin had planted in him these 4 days had apparently not survived a single night of imagining her hurt or gone. "Silas Dobbins," Julian said, low, looking between the shaking clerk and his wife's steady face, "is going to tell me exactly what he just told you. And then, God and Michaelmas willing, we are going to end this before my cousin has the chance to burn 1 more page of it." Michaelmas came in 6 days, and it came in the middle of a storm that broke over the valley the night before, with a violence the older tenants would talk about for a decade. And it was into that storm and the gray wrung out morning after it that the household of Rathmore Hall gathered, at Julian's summons, in the long gallery where 3 generations of dukes looked down from their frames upon a scene none of them would have recognized as belonging to their line. Mr. Anselm Rayburn, the family's trustee, sat at the head of the long table with the estate's ledgers stacked before him, and his spectacles pushed up into thinning gray hair. A man whose neutrality was, in this house, worth more than gold. Lady Cassandra Vane, who had once been spoken of as Julian's likelier match, and who had come, unasked, at Edmund's own invitation to witness what he had assured her would be a scandal worth attending, sat near the window with her hands folded and her face carefully arranged into polite boredom that did not, Verity noticed, quite reach her eyes. Edmund himself stood by the fire, immaculate as ever, smoothing one glove finger by finger, and it was that small fastidious motion, repeated once too often, that told Verity, who had spent a lifetime reading hands for a living, that beneath the composure something had already begun, very quietly, to crack. "My wife," Julian said, without preamble, into a room gone silent, "has found the true accounts of this estate for the last 3 years. I should like Mr. Rayburn to examine them." Verity set the small brass cornered book upon the table and opened it to the cipher pages, and beside them the plain translation she had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing, and beside that, Silas Dobbins's own signed statement, and beside that. This was the part that made Edmund's glove smoothing falter entirely. 3 letters in his own unmistakable hand, retrieved 2 nights before from the estate strongbox by Julian himself, under a warrant Rayburn had quietly obtained, instructing a frightened clerk exactly which figures to alter and by how much. "Read the 3rd letter aloud, Mr. Rayburn, if you would," Julian said. And Rayburn did, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man for whom nothing in this room was personal, and the words, Edmund's own words, dated, signed, undeniable, fell into the silence like stones into still water, each one widening the circle of what could no longer be denied. "This is absurd," Edmund said, and for the first time in 3 months his voice had lost its gentleness, gone thin and quick instead. "A forged book, a bribed clerk, a wife with every reason to lie to save her father's name. The cipher was taught to me by my father when I was 9 years old," Verity said, "before I could yet write my own name in a joined hand." "You did not know it existed until this morning." "Explain, if you can, how a document you have never seen happens to match, line for line, 3 letters you did write, and which you yourself locked in a box you believed no one but you would ever open." Edmund did not answer that. He looked instead, for one unguarded moment, toward Silas Dobbins and Rayburn, watching everything with the patient stillness of a man who has broken 100 witnesses before this one. Said only, gently, "Mr. Dobbins, under whose direction did you alter the daybook entry for the spring quarter, 3 years past? Think carefully, sir, for this answer is the only one that will matter in any court in England." Silas Dobbins twisted his cap once, hard, and looked at Verity, and then at Julian, and then, at last, at the floor, and said, "Mr. Penrose's, my lord." Every figure. I have his letters to prove it, and God forgive me, I should have said so 2 years since, when it was Mr. Ashworth's name and not mine that paid for my silence. The room did not gasp. It went, instead, utterly still, the particular stillness of a crowd realizing all at once that it is watching something true. Edmund's composure did not shatter so much as slide, all at once, the way ice lets go of a roof in a sudden thaw, and for one moment only, Verity saw beneath the immaculate cousin the man beneath, someone's disinherited, disgraced mother's son, 40 years old and still smoothing gloves the exact way, she would learn later, his own ruined mother had taught him to do as a boy. In the last house that had ever loved him, without condition. "I was owed this," he said, very quietly, to no one, to all of them. "I was raised to have Rathmore. A quirk of entail gave it to Julian's father instead, and I have spent 20 years keeping the books of a house that should have been mine, watching every rent I collected go to a boy who never once had to earn a farthing of it. That may be true, Julian said, and his voice, for the first time in the whole proceeding, was not stone at all, but something almost gentle, almost sorrowing, and it does not make one figure of what you did to Thomas Ashworth true, or right, or forgivable in the way you mean. He died believing himself disgraced for a crime he did not commit, and you let him die that way, rather than lose what you had already stolen. Edmund said nothing further. There was, in the end, no violence in it, no shouting, no blow struck. There was only Rayburn closing the true ledger with a quiet finality more damning than any gavel, and Edmund standing very straight by the fire with his gloves, at last, entirely off, and Julian saying, into the silence that followed, "You will not be tried. My father's name has been dragged through enough mud for 1 generation, and I will not add your trial to it, nor make a spectacle of a man who was, whatever else is true, raised in this house as my own brother. You will have 400 a year, paid quarterly, on the sole condition that you take ship for the colonies within the month, and never set foot in this country again while I live. That is not mercy you have earned, Edmund. It is mercy I am choosing to give, for the sake of everyone still living who loved you once, and for the sake of the boy you were before you decided a wrong done to you, licensed a worse one done to someone else." Lady Cassandra Vane, who had come to witness a scandal, and instead witnessed something closer to a reckoning, rose from her chair by the window with her composure entirely gone, and said, "Into the hush, I did not know. I want that said plainly, before everyone in this room. I did not know, and had I known, I would never have." She did not finish the sentence, and no one asked her to. It was enough. Rayburn observed later that she had said the true part aloud, before witnesses, which was more than her invitation here had required of her. It was 3 weeks later, in the same estate office where they had first bent over the same candle together, that Julian found the words he had apparently been keeping locked away as carefully as Edmund had kept his letters. Verity was closing the last of the true accounts, squaring the corners of the book the way she squared every book, out of a habit her father had given her along with everything else worth having, when Julian sat down, on the desk beside her hand, a small folded paper, not a settlement this time, not a bribe, only a single sentence in his own hand. "I said I would not touch you. I have been paying that debt back with interest ever since, if you will have the payment." Verity read it twice and looked up and found him watching her with none of the stone left in his face at all. "That is a very poor apology," she said, though her voice was not quite steady, dressed up as an accounting term. "It is not an apology," Julian said. "I am not sorry for any part of what I felt for you, only for how long I let my cousin's lies rent space in my head that belonged, by then, entirely to you. I am asking you to marry me." "We are already married," Verity said, and heard the lark begin, absurdly, to sing outside the window, the same bird, or its like, that had sung the morning after their wedding night, when neither of them had known yet what the marriage would cost or give. "We were married by an arrangement neither of us chose," Julian said. "I am asking now. Freely, with nothing left owing between us, and nothing left to buy or be bought with. Marry me, Verity, because you wish it, and for no other reason on this earth. It is the only reason I will take." "Sing it to me plainly then," Verity said, and heard her own father's old pet name for her rise up in her chest before she had decided to say it, "my lark." "All of it, so there can be no mistaking the terms." "I love you," Julian said, simply, the words entirely unarmoured, the stone gone from his voice for good this time. I loved you before I understood I was permitted to, and I have gone on loving you through every hour I let doubt sit where certainty should have stood, and I will go on loving you for whatever years are given to us, whether or not you ever find it in you to forgive me the 4 days I spent believing the worst of the finest thing that has ever happened to this house. Verity did not weep, though something in her chest ached with the specific sweetness of a debt long carried finally, freely, forgiven. Then I will have the payment, she said, and the interest, and I will hold you to every word of it. And when he kissed her then, it was nothing at all like the frightened, dutiful non-touch of their wedding night. It was slow and certain and entirely undramatic, the way two people kiss who intend to go on doing it for the rest of their lives. Their true wedding, when it came a fortnight later, was nothing like the great, cold spectacle that had opened this story. No 1,100 guests, no diamonds borrowed for the occasion, only the local parson, Mrs. Quill, weeping openly into a handkerchief she had clearly brought for the purpose, and Silas Dobbins, pardoned and reinstated at Verity's own quiet insistence, standing at the back with his cap finally still in his hands. Lady Cassandra Vane sent from the small dower cottage where she had chosen to spend a thoughtful year before rejoining society, a gift and a letter wishing them joy without a trace of bitterness in it, and married the following spring, a widowed baronet of good sense and better temper, and was, by every report that reached Rathmore Hall, entirely and deservedly happy. Mr. Rayburn retired at last from trusteeship, with the estate's books balanced to the farthing for the first time in 20 years, and framed in his own small study the letter of thanks Verity wrote him, calling it the finest fee he had ever been paid. Edmund Penrose took ship within the month as promised, and word came 18 months on that he had married a widow of modest means in Upper Canada and taken up honest work as a land agent, and Verity, reading the brief letter that brought this news, found she felt for him, at last, nothing sharper than a quiet, complicated pity, which she supposed was its own kind of mercy, paid out slowly, the way all the best debts are. It was almost exactly a year later, in the same chamber where a stranger had once broken through a dressing closet window and a husband had broken his own cold vow to reach her, that Verity sat again on the edge of the same bed in the last light of a summer evening and heard, below the window, the drag of a footstep on stone that was not a threat this time, but only Julian, coming up from the stables with the day's dust still on his boots, working hands, the smell of bergamot and horse leather that she had long since learned to call, simply, home. He came and sat beside her, and took her hand plainly, in front of no one and for no purpose but the wanting of it. And Verity thought of her father, 2 years gone now, and never once forgotten, and of the maxim he had given her before he gave her anything else worth having. A column that will not balance is not lying to you. It is hiding something. Find what it hides, and be gentle with it. She had spent a whole strange, costly year learning to read a column that would not balance. It turned out, in the end, a man was not so very different. He, too, had only been hiding something. She had found it. She had been gentle with it, and it had, in its own good time, been gentle back. If this story warmed you, if you found yourself hoping, the way I did the first time I told it, that the quiet ones are the ones worth watching, and that a debt of the heart, once it is freely forgiven, need never be called in again, then stay a while longer by the fire with me. I keep a chair here for exactly this. There's a kettle on, and I'm in no hurry to see you go. Tell me, in the comments, which line you'd have wanted handed back to you, if you were the one keeping the ledger. And if you'd like more evenings like this one, settle in and subscribe, and I'll keep the lamp lit and a place kept warm for the next story. Until then, be gentle with the columns that won't balance in your own life, and gentler still with the ones who were only ever hiding something worth forgiving. Good night.